The sun rose like a golden drumbeat over red dust and millet fields. Roosters crowed. Barefoot children ran through mango orchards. And the air smelled of wet earth and boiling millet. In a small clay house beneath a crooked baobab tree, a young girl stirred a blackened pot with her hands. Ajara, 18. Soft-spoken, but with fire behind her quiet eyes. They said her food could calm a storm. But what they didn't know was that her dreams could start one. The village had gathered for the annual festival, a celebration of tradition, harvest, and legacy. The men beat talking drums. The women danced in beads. And Ajara served groundnut soup with fried yam, smiling gently beneath a woven headscarf. But her mind wasn't on dancing. It was on leaving. Leaving to chase something no one around her had ever seen. A future made not from marriage, but from sweat and fire and oil-stained aprons. Dust rose. Children gasped. The prince had returned. Abdul, son of the local chief. Fresh from the UK, dressed in ankara lined with gold thread, and cologne that didn't belong here. Women whispered. He had come to choose a bride. And he had eyes only for one person. Ajara. As the crowd gathered, Abdul stepped forward. With the drama of a man who had never been told no, he called out her name. Loud, proud, entitled. He praised her beauty, her grace. He promised a new life, a palace, a driver, a maid. And in front of the entire village, he asked for her hand in marriage. The drums stopped. The wind held its breath. The people cheered, already celebrating her yes. But Ajara, she looked at him, at the car, at the eager eyes, and then at her own hands, stained with palm oil and charcoal. She whispered, "No." Mothers gasped. Elders frowned. A village woman cried out, "What is wrong with you? This is your only chance." But Ajara stood firm, her voice shaking but her spine unbroken. "I'm building something, and I don't need to be anyone's wife to be someone." The prince leaned in close, smiling but not with kindness. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "The city will chew you and spit you out." That night she packed her only suitcase, a faded dress, a notebook, her grandmother's cooking spoon. The village watched, but no one helped, except her grandmother. Wrinkled, eyes full of wisdom. She placed a worn coin in Ajara's palm. "Your hands," she said softly, "will build what no man can give you." As the bus to Accra pulled away, the baobab tree stood behind her like a guardian. Ajara didn't cry. She didn't wave. She looked ahead, to noise, to struggle, to strangers and smoke and hunger, but also to purpose, to recipes, to something only her spirit could taste. She didn't leave to chase a man. She left to become the fire. Prince Abdul watched the news days later. Ajara had been spotted in Accra, selling fried yam near the bus terminal. He laughed. She'll be back. But somewhere in the city, over a smoking pot and crackling oil, Ajara whispered to herself, "Let it try." The roads to Accra were long and cracked. Ajara sat by the window, clutching her grandmother's spoon and a nylon bag with 3,000 Nigerian nairas, dried cassava, and a faded notebook of recipes. She didn't know where she would sleep, or what the city would ask from her. But she did know one thing. She was never going back. The wind carried the scent of burning tires, pepper, and unfinished dreams. And still she looked forward. The city didn't welcome her. It swallowed her. Noise. Shouting hawkers. Taxi horns. Ajara stepped into the chaos, small, lost, and invisible. For 2 nights, she slept beside a shop shutter, clutching her bag to her chest. By day, she wandered the streets, offering to wash dishes, clean gutters, anything for food. On the 3rd day, someone handed her a leftover loaf of bread. She wept while eating it, not from shame, but from the weight of trying alone. With the last of her money, Ajara bought 1 small bottle of oil for yams and a pan from a roadside vendor. That night, under a broken streetlight, she began her first hustle. She peeled yams in silence, built a makeshift fire from scrap wood, and began frying. People passed. Some laughed. But one young trotro driver stopped, bought a portion, and whispered, "This tastes like home." He came back the next day and brought 2 friends. By the end of the week, she had just enough to buy more oil. And by the second week, people began to call her Yam Girl. The trotro driver's name was Kweku, kind-hearted, humble, always rushing somewhere. When he found out she was sleeping in the open, he offered her a corner in his small kiosk behind the station. She hesitated, but hunger is louder than pride. He taught her how to count in English, how to calculate change quickly, and how to bargain with Lego-style confidence. By month 2, Ajara had a little table, a plastic chair, and customers who waited in line for her pepper sauce. But she was still just surviving, not yet building. Then came the fire. One night, a faulty wire sparked in the market square. Flames roared through wooden stalls like hungry spirits. Ajara lost her pan, her oil, her yam stock, everything. She stood there, barefoot on blackened earth, watching the smoke curl around her dreams. People said she should return home. Even Kweku said, "Sometimes we fight too hard for what's not meant for us." But Ajara? She looked at the soot on her fingers and whispered, "This is how diamonds are made." She borrowed 2,000 Nigerian nairas from a tomato seller who had once tasted her food. With it, she bought a second-hand cart, rusty, dented, but with wheels. She painted the words "Mama's Fire Pot" on it in bold red chalk. She made flyers with handwritten words. "Original Northern Yam and Pepper Sauce. Taste the village." And this time, customers followed her cart. Office workers, students, boda drivers, even church women. Each plate came with a smile and something else, a little folded quote from her grandmother's recipe book. People began collecting them. She was feeding bellies and souls. One afternoon, a local TV reporter stopped by her cart. They were filming a segment on street food culture in Accra. She served them with her usual grace, yams, sauce, and wisdom. And they asked her name. She said, "Ajara. But some call me the Yam Girl." The segment aired on Friday night. By Saturday morning, her cart had a queue stretching into the street. They called her the Yam Queen of Kainchi. People came from other parts of the city just to taste her food. And one woman, dressed in a fine wrapper and gold earrings, watched from a car window. She didn't say much, just asked softly, "Would you like to cook in a real kitchen?" Later that week, the same woman returned. She handed Ajara a note. It was an invitation to use a small kiosk space rent-free, for 3 months, at her daughter's hair salon compound in East Legon. It was more than just space. It was a test. Ajara stood there, holding the note with shaking hands, tears clinging to her lashes. She had never entered East Legon. She didn't even own shoes. But she knew this. Her fire was about to meet fuel. She stood on a footbridge, the city glittering like stars poured on concrete. Behind her, her old cart. Ahead, something vast. Something waiting. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to rise so high the sky would whisper her name. The streets of East Legon didn't hum like Kainchi. They whispered. It was a place of tinted windows, foreign plates, and men who never looked twice at roadside food. Where perfumes hung in the air longer than greetings. Where poverty didn't belong, not even in smell. Ajara stepped out of the taxi, clutching her cooking pot like it was a shield. She wore borrowed shoes that pinched her toes and a second-hand dress stitched at the shoulder with red thread. But she stood tall. In front of her was a small kiosk space tucked beside a fancy hair salon, clean walls, tiled floor, and a single window hatch. Her hands trembled as she touched the keys. This wasn't just a space. It was the doorway to dignity. She started small. Yam, pepper sauce, goat meat if she could afford it, and the folded notes from her grandmother's recipe book, each one carrying a proverb or quiet wisdom. At first, the customers didn't come. The hair salon women wrinkled their noses. A security man asked if she was the maid. But one woman, a working-class teacher named Auntie Frida, stopped, bought a plate, and smiled. "This tastes like my mother's hands," she said softly. She came back the next day, then brought 2 co-workers, then 5. By week 3, Ajara was serving office workers, delivery men, and women in expensive heels who claimed they were just curious. She changed the name from Mama's Fire Pot to something simpler. Ajara's. No frills. Just her name. Her story. Each meal now came with a folded paper tucked under the napkin. The fire that burns you today may cook your feast tomorrow. When your feet are tired, walk with your spirit. Don't chase crowns. Grow roots. People began to collect them. Some framed them. Some stuck them on mirrors. Some cried when they read them. Because this wasn't food. It was memory. It was healing. It was home, served hot in a paper plate. One day, a popular food vlogger, at Chop Life Accra, came to Ajara's kiosk after hearing whispers. He ordered silently, recorded everything, then left with a nod. Ajara didn't think much of it, until her phone, a tiny button Nokia, began ringing endlessly the next morning. Customers flooded the kiosk. There was a line that stretched past the hair salon and onto the next street. The video had gone viral. This is not street food. This is emotional therapy. Meet Ajara, the Yam Whisperer. News sites picked it up. Blogs. Even an expat magazine. Ajara's name was suddenly everywhere. But she didn't buy new clothes. Or upgrade her phone. She simply bought more yam. More oil. More pans. And added a bench outside the kiosk, so old women could sit while waiting. With savings from the growing business, Ajara hired her first 2 assistants. ESI, a single mother from her old Kainchi circle. Zainab, a quiet Hausa girl who reminded her of home. She taught them not just to cook, but to serve with honor. Each customer was a guest. Each plate was a prayer. By the 3rd month, she'd paid rent for the next full year. The woman who gave her the kiosk returned and smiled. "You've outgrown this space," she whispered. Ajara knew. She could feel it in her bones. She needed a restaurant, a real one. But she also knew something else. She couldn't build just for money. She had to build for meaning. One day she received a letter. Handwritten. Torn at the edge. Her grandmother had fallen ill. Ajara didn't wait. She shut down the kiosk for the first time in 6 months and returned home. Back to the baobab tree, the cracked compound, the place where her fire began. Her grandmother lay on a bamboo mat, too weak to sit, but her eyes still sharp. She smiled when she saw Ajara. No tears, just pride. She placed an old, cloth-wrapped bundle in her hand, the rest of the recipe book. Pages browned with time, corners bent from use. "Take this," she whispered. "Feed the world. But don't forget where the fire started." Back in Accra, Ajara searched. She walked the city for weeks looking at locations. Too expensive. Too far. Too dirty. Then one day she found it, an old, abandoned tailor's shop in OSU, with a cracked front window and enough space for 10 tables. She poured her entire savings into it. The paint was white and gold. The walls bore murals of village life. And the windows? Etched with her grandmother's proverbs. Above the door. Ajara's, the taste of home. No prices, no gimmicks, just love plated daily. She hired only women, girls like her. Hustlers, survivors, daughters of women who never had dreams of their own. She trained them like soldiers of warmth. No shouting in the kitchen. No leftovers wasted. Every customer must be seen, heard, fed. They wore matching aprons with a baobab tree stitched on the chest. Customers returned not just for the food, but for the feeling. They said eating there was like being remembered. 2 months after opening, Ajara received an invitation. The Ghanaian Chamber of Commerce was awarding her Rising Female Entrepreneur of the Year. She didn't understand the full meaning until she walked onto that stage. Cameras flashed. People clapped. And for the first time in her life she felt seen. Not as a pretty girl. Not as a poor girl. But as a builder. As a woman who said no to a prince and yes to herself. News of her award reached the village within days. People watched her on TV inside shops with cracked screens. They stared at her picture in the newspaper, amazed. Is that not Ajara? Ajara the food girl? Ajara who rejected Prince Abdul? The same mouse that once mocked, now spoke with reverence. And Prince Abdul? He watched too. From a hotel room in Tamale, where his campaign posters were already fading. The rain tapped gently on the window glass like an old friend returning with secrets. The tables were half full. The kitchen hummed with quiet purpose. And Ajara, dressed in her simple patterned apron, hair wrapped in a cream scarf, moved like a conductor, orchestrating flavor and rhythm. And then he walked in. Prince Abdul. He stepped inside the restaurant as if the world owed him a seat, in dark sunglasses and polished shoes, unaware he was standing inside a dream he once dismissed. He didn't recognize her name on the signage, didn't recognize the quotes on the walls, though they once mocked him when she spoke them aloud. And he didn't recognize her, not at first, not as she stood behind the glass of the kitchen pass-through watching him eat, but when he asked for the bill, and the waitress said, "It's been paid for." And when she finally stepped out, apron, scarf, no makeup, just purpose, he looked up and froze. His spoon fell, because in front of him stood the woman he once promised a palace to, now owning one built from fire, not fantasy. Her mind drifted, back to the cracked roads, to frying yam by bus stations, to washing her hands in cold rain, to nights spent crying quietly in borrowed rooms with cockroach stains and distant car horns. Back to no. Back to that day at the festival when the whole village waited for her to kneel, and she stood instead. And now, he sat in her building, a fork in his hand, a truth in his chest, and for the first time no words on his tongue. She greeted him like any other guest. No mockery, no pride, just soft eyes and a strong spine. "Welcome to Ajaris," she said. He blinked. His mouth opened but nothing came out. She nodded at the waitress, turned, and disappeared into the kitchen. She didn't need to prove anything. His silence was her medal. That night, as she swept the floor after closing, Esai asked why she paid for his meal. Ajara smiled. "You don't need to humiliate someone to prove you've risen. If you truly carry light, it'll shine without noise." It became a lesson whispered among her staff, Ajara's law of grace. And unknowingly, that moment became the most powerful marketing story her brand ever had. The tale spread, of the village girl who fed the prince who once mocked her. It became legend. 2 months later, Ajara opened her second location in Kumasi, then another in Tamale, then one in Cape Coast. Her restaurants all bore the same heartbeat. Local recipes, a calm, village-inspired aesthetic, folded wisdom quotes tucked inside napkins. She didn't chase trends. She created culture. Her grandmother's recipe book became the soul of the business. And now, international investors were calling. Ajara was invited to a national entrepreneurship summit in Accra. She spoke in front of ministers, CEOs, and scholars. When she finished her story, the room stood in applause. One minister pulled her aside. "You're not just building restaurants," he said. "You're rebuilding our people's pride." And he offered her a government grant to open a culinary training center for underprivileged girls. She accepted, not because of the money, but because every pot must birth more hands. She launched the Mama Ajara Foundation, named not after herself, but her grandmother. The foundation offered free culinary training for girls from villages, microgrants for women-led food startups, feeding programs in orphanages and slums. She hired counselors, teachers, nutritionists. She didn't just serve food anymore, she served futures. And every graduate of the program received a printed card that read, "Let your hunger lead you, not to begging but to building." She returned to her village for the first time in 2 years, not to prove anything, but to fulfill a promise. She walked through the same market where she once carried yam in a basket, where children had laughed, where elders had shaken their heads. Now those same elders welcomed her with drums. They renamed the village school block after her grandmother, Mama Aisha Learning Center. Ajara didn't cry in public, but alone that night under the baobab tree, she wept into her grandmother's old shawl. Not from pain, from the weight of love. Weeks later, Prince Abdul sent her a message. It was simple, formal. "May we meet for coffee?" She didn't reply. He tried again. "I'd like to apologize for everything." She agreed to meet, not in secret, not in private, but at her own restaurant. He arrived in designer suits, trying to wear humility like a jacket. But she saw through it. He asked for forgiveness. She gave it freely. But when he hinted at a new beginning, a romantic one, she smiled softly and said, "I'm not building a future with someone who once couldn't imagine me in one." Months later, a BBC documentary featured her journey. The title was simple: Ajara, the girl who built fire into fortune. The footage showed her roadside days, her first cart, her feeding orphans, her embracing graduates of the foundation, her sitting silently at her grandmother's grave. The documentary trended globally. Her Instagram page grew by 1 million followers. Diaspora Africans praised her. Women called her a symbol. Men called her a lesson. And yet, she still woke every morning at 4:30 a.m. to light the stove, to test the pepper sauce, to make sure every plate still tasted like truth. A year passed, and on the night of her foundation's 3rd graduation ceremony, as she handed certificates to 50 new girls in white aprons, Kweku, the trotro driver who once gave her shelter, stood at the back of the room. Older now, beard graying, but eyes the same. He had never stopped supporting her, from afar. Never asked for more than her success. Never reminded her of the nights she cried beside his gas stove. And that night, after the crowd faded and the lights dimmed, he walked up to her, gently placed an envelope in her hand, and whispered, "Only if your fire still has space." Inside was no ring, just a note. "I don't want your throne. I just want to build beside you." She didn't answer that night, because her mind was now on something far more dangerous, far more audacious. Owning the land she was once born to serve on. The prince's family still owned half the village. Land that stretched across the very ground her grandmother once farmed without pay. Land soaked in generations of silence. Ajara wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in restoration. So she began a private negotiation. Discreet, legal, patient, and with the help of her lawyers, grants, and savings, she prepared a proposal to buy back the land, piece by piece. But someone didn't like that. One evening, a man dropped an envelope at her restaurant gate. No name, no return address. Inside, a torn photograph of her village home, burned at the edges. And a note: "Go back to your pots. This land is not for sale." It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She simply looked at the photo and said, "Then I'll build schools beside your palaces until your children start learning from mine." That same week, one of her restaurants, the original Ajara's, the Taste of Home in East Legon, caught fire. The fire department claimed it was electrical, but the CCTV showed a man in a hooded jacket slipping through the side gate just minutes before the flames erupted. The footage ends just as he pours something by the wall and disappears into smoke. The next morning, Ajara stood silently in the soot. No tears, no news interviews, just ashes clinging to her apron. She bent slowly, picked up a burnt wooden spoon from the wreckage, clutched it to her chest. Her team surrounded her, waiting for her to speak. She raised her head and whispered, "We start again." But this time, she wasn't just rebuilding a restaurant. She was about to rebuild an entire nation of women who won't kneel anymore. She came back. Ajara stepped onto the same dusty path she once ran down barefooted, her eyes scanning the clay walls and bent wooden doors of the homes she used to know by scent. But this time, she arrived not in worn slippers or a fraying wrapper, but in a long, elegant green dress that swept the earth like a breeze of dignity. Her father's walking stick tapped beside her, older now but carried with quiet pride. People watched, silent, some with shame, others with awe. The girl they mocked, the girl they whispered about when she returned from the palace, broken and humiliated, was now a woman who had built a future far beyond the imaginations of her mockers. She wasn't just rich, she was respected. Her return wasn't about revenge, it was about home. Her first stop was the old well, still dry, still cracked. She crouched beside it and placed her hands on its stones. "You didn't give me water, but you gave me fire." That night, the villagers gathered around the community square, unsure why the richest woman in the state had come home. Men who once spat by her feet now sat cross-legged like boys on the first day of school. Girls leaned on their mothers, whispering her name like she was a folktale character that had come alive. Then she stood up and spoke. "You know me? You think you do. You saw a girl once full of dreams and fire. You watched her fall. And maybe you felt better because she failed. Maybe you laughed or pitied her. But you never saw the woman I would become. You see, life doesn't begin when someone gives you a title. It begins when you give yourself permission to be more than your past. I didn't come back to boast. I came back to build." She was offering to rebuild the village, the school, the well, the clinic her mother once bled in, a vocational center for girls, to teach them tailoring, tech, and trade. No one had ever given them anything except empty promises and election banners. But Ajara wasn't promising. She was starting. Construction teams arrived the next day. The palace that once turned its back on her was now crumbling under its own pride. The prince, older, colder, and twice divorced, heard of Ajara's return like a rumor too painful to believe. He watched the news from a silent hall where no one called him beloved anymore. A palace aide whispered, "She's building an empire in the village, Your Highness." He scoffed. "She's still a village girl." But even he didn't believe that anymore. Ajara didn't rebuild with concrete alone. She built with grace. She hugged those who wronged her. She fed the old woman who once accused her of bewitching the prince. She sat beside young girls and listened to their ideas. And slowly something magical happened. The village stopped being just a memory. It became a movement. Daughters from across the region came barefoot, carried books in cloth bags, and waited at the gates of opportunity. The ribbon was cut not with gold scissors, but with the hands of Ajara and her father. That day she gave a final speech. "I was offered a throne I didn't deserve. Then I built one no man could afford. This is not just about me. This is about every girl who has been told she's too loud, too poor, too bold, too different. My name is Ajara. I was once laughed at. Now I'm building laughter into dreams." She whispers, "Mama, we made it. But there's still more to do." Weeks later, a dusty, silent figure arrives in the village in a black SUV. The driver doesn't introduce him. The man steps out alone, his once regal garments replaced by a plain white kaftan. It's him, the prince. But no one kneels. No one hurries to greet him. He walks slowly through the village, watching what Ajara built. A new world. He finally sees her, standing at the edge of the new well. She doesn't turn. She already knows it's him. He speaks quietly. "You turned what I rejected into royalty." She doesn't answer. She simply turns, smiles softly, and says, "Not royalty. Legacy." She was never meant to marry the throne. She was meant to become the kingdom.